Good afternoon and welcome to Saturday Sesh. My name is Trey Reckling. I'm the founder and director of Academy of Cannabis Science, and we're so glad to have you here today. And we're very excited to introduce two gentlemen from Web Joint Productions who created a documentary called In Smoke Cannabis Equity, and that's Antonio Javanyar and Alvaro Wong. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks for having us. Looking forward to our
Thank you so
conversation.
much.
Good to have you. So tell us a little bit about you and about WebJoin, if you don't mind, and
Sure.
and you can decide who goes first.
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started. My name is Antonio Javanyar. I'm the head of marketing of WebJoint. So WebJoint is actually the leading cannabis delivery software in the United States. Essentially, what we do is we provide business management software for the non-storefront retailers. So those are primarily delivery businesses here in the state of California, and essentially give them all the tools that they need to operate their business. What that allows us to do is actually track how cannabis products are moving through the supply chain, so that when it is time to actually report that to the state seed to sale tracking software metric, we can actually send all that data and all our operators are at ease knowing that they've been operating in compliance. I'm also the producer of the documentary that we're discussing today.
Fantastic.
My name is Alvaro Wong. I am the director of the documentary. I was also the ex-creative director at WebJoint. I am now the founder and CEO of a content marketing agency in cannabis called Prime Scale Creative. So
Great. Well, so glad to have you both on, and we know the work of cannabis equity is huge work. And just to kind of set a little background, we think our audience already knows, or we like to assume, but the impact of cannabis laws and especially enforcement has had a tremendous effect, especially on BIPOC communities who were unevenly treated, inequitably treated, and arrested at much higher rates, sentenced at much stronger ways than their white counterparts. And so the work to undo that harm, we can maybe never undo all the harms, right? Because we know families have been crushed, but it is on all of us who are enjoying legal cannabis and decriminalized cannabis to make sure we look out for these communities who have suffered for many, many years. And so just to set the stage in the most basic sort of way, because we none of us can forget that while we're enjoying cannabis, cannabis prisoners still exist in jail, upwards of 40,000 of them, nonviolent offenders who are not doing anything worse than a lot of us enjoy on the daily. So just to set the stage for the importance of what you all did, could you tell us a little bit about the documentary? Not everybody got a chance to see it before we talked today. So first of all, how did the issue of social equity efforts in LA get your attention?
Yeah, I can get into that. So for one, we're a minority-owned business operating in the cannabis industry. So social equity has always been on the table for us from the get-go. We always had our eyes and ears watching how the social equity program would unfold in Los Angeles. And the reason why that's so important is because Los Angeles is poised to be, and still is, like one of the largest cannabis economies, cannabis markets in the nation. And the implementation of the social equity program wouldn't necessarily dictate how social equity programs would be enacted across the nation, but we knew that a lot of local municipalities and other states, as they were preparing to legalize, were looking at the social equity program in Los Angeles to see how it would all unfold. The transition into actually actively participating in the cannabis industry was mainly because, as I mentioned earlier, the delivery licenses, the non-storefront retailers were our target market. Those are the folks that we want to support and serve through technology. And there was a point where we realized, why aren't these retail licenses being issued at the rate in which we expected them to be issued? So the natural transition became, hey, let's attend these Department of Cannabis regulation meetings, which are open to the public and is what I like to consider the trenches. Like, this is where the fight is being fought on the political side of things. So there we got to meet community leaders, activists that were fighting for social equity in its truest form against the city of Los Angeles. And we found our little niche within that space. Like, who could we serve in this community? How do we support the larger movement that's going on in the city of Los Angeles?
Fantastic. And for those of, like I said, for those of us or the I've watched it, but people who might be watching now, could you give us a brief intro about the documentary itself?
Sure, absolutely, I can do that. To piggyback on what Antonio was saying, when we were present at these city council meetings and the hearings, it was a little heartbreaking to see just lines and lines of people who had been paying rent on commercial properties, like we're talking tens of thousands of dollars every month. Um, they were held liable by their investors and their community and everybody else. And when it was time for them to go up and speak, it was just like they were just yelling and explaining their situation to an empty wall. It didn't seem like really there was a lot of empathy on the legislative side. So as a response, Antonio and I were like, "Hey, man, if they're not giving these guys a voice, like it's up to us. Like we have to create something that's going to put pressure on the city, and it can cause real change, right?" So that's kind of like the background of the documentary and why we did it. But essentially, a lot of people didn't know because there were so many licenses. Everything was reduced to a number. Everybody there was just, oh, application one, application two, right? And to me as a director, when you start personifying these numbers and you start giving each number a name and a story and a background and a face, right, it becomes a lot harder to ignore their struggles. And so that's what really this documentary was meant to do, was meant to personify these numbers on a spreadsheet into real human emotions. And so that's really the background of the documentary, was really giving these folks a platform for them to be able to share their stories of struggle, not only before the licensing process but during the licensing process, which was meant to repair the war on drugs, right? Some of the carnage of the war on drugs, which it hadn't really done all that well. And then we saw, the struggles and the hurdles that the application process brought about.
So we're talking about, is it correct, 100 licenses available for this round and over 300
Yeah.
applicants? Is that right?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the social equity program in Los Angeles can be broken down essentially in three parts. There's phase one, phase two, and phase three. The meat of the documentary focused on phase three, round one. That's where we started. So just to backtrack a little bit, phase one are essentially all the pre-ICO, pre-recreational use cannabis dispensaries that existed in the city of Los Angeles, institutions that were basically, serving medical patients with cannabis in the city of LA. So phase one essentially transitioned all those medical licenses into recreational licenses so that upon January 1st, 2018, they can still continue business and actually open up for recreational use. Phase two focused on licenses that were pretty much every part of the supply chain outside of retail, outside of new retail licenses. So this is your cultivation, testing labs, distribution, manufacturing. A lot of the pain points came around with phase three, round one. Again, as we focused on in the documentary, mainly because these were the new retail licenses that were coming up. And this is where the social equity program and actually having a stake in the cannabis industry intersected. So initially, it would be round one would be 100 licenses. Round two, I believe, would be an additional 100 licenses. And then round three would involve the delivery pilot program, which were just 60 licenses of non-storefront deliveries in the city of Los Angeles. And specifically for round one, it was a first come, first serve kind of process. And that's kind of where the first episode of the documentary starts.
And like you all mentioned, people were required to sit on property to take on in some cases long-term leases that were very expensive, just in hopes of getting an application. So in order to qualify to be considered, they're already making huge investments. So I think it's important for people to understand that. We know there's a lot of heartache in the story, and because of the way the process happened. For those who haven't seen the documentary, could you share a little bit about an example of how that played out for folks?
Yeah, I think the one that really stuck out to me the most was in episode 2, where we talked about Evelyn.
Mm-hmm.
So the story goes that when people were required to apply, the application process was first come first serve, and everything was done digitally, right? So people at 12 p.m. we're required, I can't remember the exact time, but at 12, let's say 12 p.m. we're required to be in front of their computers, ready to log in, everything, ready to input in these empty fields. However, some people were able to access that application process before 12 p.m. I think it was up to like 5 minutes or 3 minutes before. So those people really got like a few minutes head start. When those people submitted their applications, obviously they were the first to submit. They were to get their licenses. And when this came to light that the system had allowed certain people in, the city normalized these applications in a non-standard way. And it goes into like how exactly the normalization process was done in the episode. But long story short, the people who got in early had around a 23 to 30 second advantage over those who didn't. So that normalization process didn't take that into account. Evelyn was one of the guests on our documentary. And when we told her the normalization process and we went in there and did the math, saw her timestamps, she discovered on camera that if the city hadn't messed up the normalization process, she would have been one of the people to get a license. So really seeing that like heartbreak and the defeat of the spirit happening on camera, that to me was one of those moments where it was like, wow, like this is really why we're doing it. Like we really need to hold these folks accountable. But I believe she did end up getting a license, so that was great, later down the road. But at the moment, that was definitely one of the heartaches that really stood out to me.
For sure. And I just watched that piece again this morning, and to see that realization come across and say, I think she said, I'm mind blown. I didn't realize that. And so for perspective, we know that the California cannabis industry has already had a huge head start and has been retail legal for years now. And so this is an effort after everybody's had a tremendous head start. And then within this process to provide some fairness, the process itself was unfair. So people within the process, some people got a head start that others didn't. So just to clarify that for folks, considering how emotionally taxing the application process and the follow-up was for folks, how hard was it to get people to agree to be interviewed, to be part of this?
I think at first we approached Kika. Kika was one of the first people that we approached, and we said, hey, like, we'd really love to get you, to tell your story on camera. It was a little difficult for them to agree about being on camera because they thought we were just another company looking to kind of like exploit their stories, right? Like just get some press, get some clicks, get some traffic online, and then call it at that. But the more that they saw us show up to these city council meetings and stick by them and start to create content pieces around these things and really show the strength of allyship there, I think that's when they were, a little bit more receptive to being on camera. And then all the subsequent interviews, obviously we had Kika, we had Evelyn, we had Madison. So a lot of them were, as a community started to open up and, welcome us with open arms in the form of allyship. So that was great to see.
And if I could just add to what Alvaro just mentioned about interviewing folks and getting folks in front of the camera to tell their stories, I think it really speaks to the kind of behavior that surrounded social equity applicants by larger companies that were looking to invest in them, speaking to the predatory nature of the contracts and operating agreements that were offered to these folks who were just trying to understand how to navigate this system that wasn't necessarily built to operate on day one, already being offered predatory contracts, already having paid rent for 2 to 3 years, and not having the ability to just trust anyone with their story. And also speaks to the importance of being community first when it comes to situations like this. Like it's no surprise that the cannabis industry is full of money. There's a lot of money on the table to be made in the cannabis industry, but at the same time, the city wants to make their money, corporations want to make their money, and the only way they can make that money is through these licenses. And what they're forgetting in the larger equation is who's the community these policies are meant to serve, and how do we make sure that they have that we can establish a pipeline that allows them to get through these hurdles, through the red tape, through the bureaucracy, to actually have a sustainable cannabis company as soon as they get their license.
Absolutely. And so you talk about the predatory nature, and some people might not be aware. So some licensees who are already operating went through a process, and part of that process was to talk about their equity efforts. And some of them, and we saw this firsthand in working with a cannabis licensee that talked a great game and said, hey, this is our value, and we're dedicated to the cause, and we've established these equity partners in California, and we're providing them this for education and this for support, and we're going to make them give them this role within the company. And as soon as those guys got their license, their passion just dwindled, and I think we were fooled as much by the pseudo passion they put up as a lot of people, and they got their license.
Exactly.
And it was really disgusting to see. And I know that's only one of many people who went through the process. And then some people, once those licenses were gained, were just dismissed, or kind of existed in a tokenship kind of agreement within the company. It was disgusting to see how people were manipulated. So that people have a little backstory and understanding there. Did you encounter any other surprises as you interviewed people? I know you talked about the great surprise of being able to tell somebody on camera about how the process affected her. Anything else that might have surprised you, or outcomes having done the documentary that you didn't anticipate going into it?
I think well, there was a couple. So one, to piggyback off your comment about predatory agreements, like, we didn't really understand how deep this went. Like, this was so common across equity applicants, because you're talking about people who have historically been not systemically deprived of resources as far as education goes, right? Like, these people had to depend on those who could pay $10,000 a month in rent for a retail property. And a lot of the times that we were interviewing people, like, oh yeah, we found our equity investor on Craigslist. And I'm like, wait a second, like, on Craigslist? They're like, yeah, they just put out a call for social equity applicants, and once they reviewed those agreements, it was kind of like, yeah, so you have to pay us back. This was one of the examples. You have to pay us back for all the rent that we've been covering, and still give us 50% share of your equity, right? Like, and because these people weren't familiar on how to navigate through a legal contract that was hundreds of pages long, they didn't have the resources to be a lawyer to do this. Like, this was one of the things that really shocked us. But I think what shocked us the most was, post documentary, the residual effects of it was that the city actually ended up expanding the delivery pilot program. So through the voices that we were able to amplify through our media, our art, our creation, our content, the city did feel pressure. And as a result, they did expand the number of delivery licenses that they were able to grant. So they said, hey, you know what? If we can't grant more brick and mortar licenses, let's give these folks a shot to run a proper cannabis delivery. So that was a big shock for us, for sure.
Oh, for sure. Kudos, because we know those meetings will come and gone, and maybe be forgotten, except for those by people who were directly affected. Can you talk to me a little bit about the inner politics? So you're working with a group of equity applicants who've already been disenfranchised by the system, left behind in some cases, and then within that process, some got advantages because they got in early, and some didn't. So you've got this division within this equity pool and you're talking to people who some got lucky and got in early, and probably don't want to revisit the system, don't want to start over because they already got what they wanted. And then you got the people who got shut out, who are like, no, that guy or that woman shouldn't have got that license to begin with. We need to start over and be fair. How did you manage that and maintain your neutrality and help them understand, hey, we're not picking sides, we're just telling a story? How difficult was it for you to navigate those internal politics?
I think it was surprisingly one of the more challenging aspects of the documentary, because at the same time, we went into this documentary knowing that we needed to highlight these stories, and as we started, it was, hey, let's folks would just wanted their license. They've just been paying rent for so long, and they're just exhausted. There's no other way to put it. They just want their license, and like let's build this. Let's revisit the system so that we can get as many applications out as possible. And then as the story continues to develop, you have folks like Jumani, and you also have Corey Rogan, who were the two applicants that got in early that we got on camera. It kind of branched off where now we have a pool of folks that don't want to revisit the entire process. And then you have folks that are demanding more justice. And that actually extrapolates to the larger community organizations focused around social equity. Now we had to navigate around not just one person or this applicant or the other, like full organizations that were pulling strings on different sides of the spectrum to get some sort of compromise through. And I think this really speaks to the power of community organization. From our experience, it was really through the lens of Kika Keith and Luis Rivera. Luis is the founder of Social Equity LA, and they kind of work hand in hand with one another to make sure that we can at least get some compromise through the system, some compromise through the city of LA. And that was really the result of just months and months of coalition building, revisiting policy. We had policy experts, we had folks that were in the private sector of the industry trying to put a comprehensive compromise to the table, which resulted in the eventual lawsuit brought onto the city.
Thank you. And
sorry if I could add to that really quickly there. Antonio mentioned Jumani. So I think as storytellers, what we really wanted to do was tell both sides of the story, right? Because there are it's not so like black and white here, right? Like there are people who were accepting of the process, and there were people who weren't accepting of the process. And I think as a director, I really wanted to make sure that both sides of the story were told. So when you build up a certain narrative, like, yeah, people got in early, this and that, and then we cut to Jumani saying, hey, like nothing is perfect, like nothing in this world is perfect, application processes aren't perfect, the city's trying to do its best, like if we're still hanging on to this hiccup during round one, that's preventing us from getting the rest of the 100 licenses rolled out. It's preventing us from getting to round three. So let's just continue with this process, let's push ahead, and let's do what's best for the community. And a lot of people also resonated with that narrative, right? So I thought it was really, really important to tell that from a neutral perspective, but let both sides of the story be told, and let the viewer ultimately make that decision.
And kudos to both of you, because it is as far as storytelling, it's very it's provocative, it's interesting, and you keep kind of unpeeling layers of it, and if people haven't seen it, they might not realize that, then it went to an investigation, and then it was months later before the truth was even out. Because at first, the city was saying, oh, well, only 2 people got in early, and it ends up over 200 people got in early.
Yeah, there's hundreds of applicants.
So it was a real mess, and thank you for shining a light on it, because depending on who tells the story, everything changes, right? So thank you for telling the story and helping those of us outside LA and outside of that process really understand what happens, because we know the propaganda and the war on drugs has like we said, has had tremendous effect, and we can't settle for half-ass efforts, right? And so and a shout out to you for wearing your DARE hat. The irony of that, some of our students will recognize that was a program started by Daryl Gates, who was who led the LAPD for years and started SWAT teams and did all this crazy stuff, but also ran one of the most racist police organizations in the country. And he started that program and started it in the schools, and it was a highly effective propaganda tool. And a lot of our students went through it as young people. Yep. So we got to recognize it wasn't just Nancy Reagan; it was institutionalized brainwashing, right? And so, we've all been victimized by that process, but none quite like the BIPOC community. I've got some more questions for you, but I want to open the floor to people on the call and see what questions they might have for you. So if you're on the call and you got a question, raise your hand. Let us know what you got. Otherwise, I'm going to keep asking. Anybody? And good to see Joy joined us a little bit after the start. So welcome, Joy.
Thank you. Sorry here, having trouble finding the mute button.
No worries.
I would be so interested to know. Most of my work is in New York State. I hail from Seattle. I just do a lot of work in New York. And as you know, New York, even on the books of the actual legislation itself of MRTA, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, even starts out with, this is the legislative intent of this legislation. Whereas in hemp, which is, despite the fact that I'm the president of the Center for the Study of Cannabis and Social Policy, the bulk of my work is in industrial hemp. And so I've had to deal with lots of litigation over the last 30 years around this plant. And you're constantly having to prove what is the legislative intent, unless you have the legislators themselves, which only in one recent case we were able to get an amicus brief from 29 drafting legislators. But other than that, you're having to prove it. So the legislators in New York knew that. It seems that New York is learning a lot from the hard lessons of those legalized states that came before it, and wants to, intends to, and of course we're having to be beyond vigilant as we watch the unfolding and the implementation of this, wants to deliver on the legislative intent, which is in the statutory language, which is a gift that we do not normally have in statute, or on the books, to sort of preserve what the intent was. Do you gentlemen see anything, to the extent you've been looking at the uncovering of New York, do you see any sort of around any corners where you're like, they're still going to run into this problem? And or what are corners you want to make sure that New York sees around?
Yeah.
To the extent you know their framework.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. I appreciate the question. And I think you can boil it down to the fundamentals of like how communities and industries interact with the legal framework in their city. Because similarly in Los Angeles, when we enacted the social equity program, there was a lot of, for lack of a better word, hype around how it was structured and who would be leading the charge, so to speak. So the mayor appointed Kat Packer to be the executive director of the social equity program in Los Angeles. Yes. And she was part of the community, which I know, for a lot of folks was like, yo, this is like a great bridge to the actual institution, the actual bureaucracy that we have to work against to get what we need as social equity applicants. And to her credit, she did, in my opinion at least, she did what she could have done in the position that she was in. Because we also have to be cognizant with Los Angeles being one of the first movers of the social equity program, there was no blueprint for her to figure this out. She had to navigate that space on her own, and also like kind of mediate with the community to make that happen. I think the burden of legislative intent is it falls on the shoulders of the policymakers who champion that legislative intent. It's on them to be to see it through the way that the legislation was written with its intent, so to speak, right? But at the same time, it's also on the community and on the industry where they fall short, you hold them accountable, because there are systems in place for you to protest against that, to maybe have someone from the community actually be involved in the actual policy making, to again act as a bridge. And where that falls short, there are other ways that which you can be involved in that process. So for example, when we were going through the audit here in Los Angeles, a lot of folks were upset mainly because it would also put a pause on the social equity program entirely, meaning it wasn't just retail that was stopped, it would be everything that was stopped. And folks demanded that someone from the community had a seat at the table when this audit was going on, that we had channels to hold folks accountable, specifically policymakers on the cannabis side, to ensure that what the community wanted, they enacted in policy. And again, where they fall short, the community had to come together, build coalitions, and hold them accountable. And without that, that's kind of like we wouldn't have this documentary. That's where we as WebJoint from the private sector felt like we fit in, where, hey, we have these resources to tell this story. We have the platform to tell this story. Let's engage with that community and hold these folks accountable. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yes, no, you're wonderful. And coalition building is, of course, is sort of obvious in 101, right, of cannabis advocacy and the unfolding of this dream and delivering on it 110%. What is fascinating, of course, is that the New York Cannabis Control Board, when we talk about those policymakers, some of them are very dear friends of mine, both from within the government, but also, I mean, for God's sake, the executive director is Chris Alexander of the Drug Policy Alliance, who, they have the general counsel from the Human Rights Commission on that board. They have labor union organizers. I mean, they have packed that board with people from within the community and from various aspects of the community, very carefully curated board members. And they have a cannabis advisory board. What is particularly practical about the response that you delivered, and thank you so much for it, is, and I've been a people organizer organizing for some 30 years now, but this idea of making sure that there's somebody from the industry or the coalition on the audits, that is so, hadn't thought of that one, brother. Thank you. Excellent. And just tremendous work. Is the movie, I literally just got on board, thank you, Trey, because of Facebook. And Trey invited me to this event. I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know about this documentary had it not been for Trey's outreach. So can you just give me a quickie, and I apologize that I joined a few minutes late. Is this documentary available right now? Is it something that you're working on?
Yeah, it's actually available right now on YouTube. Episode 1 and 2 are available for free streaming.
Oh my God, it's a docuseries.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys are fucking awesome. Okay, thank you for that. I need to share this, including with multiple members of the Cannabis Control Board, to the extent they aren't already aware. And, obviously you've been working with Kiko and others. I'm learning about this as I'm listening to you speak. And so we certainly share a lot of those same friends, but man, everybody. And I'm sitting here in Washington, as is Trey, one of the very first movers of adult use. I mean, we had legalized in 98, medical, adult use in 2012. We got nothing. I mean, there is not a single social equity piece built into this other than the original initiative itself. It was important for the ACLU. It was attorney, Allison Holcomb, basically, who drove the initiative I-502. That was to really try to keep out-of-state money and big money out of this and make it so that small businesses could get into it. And my message, as I move about the cabin public speaking and at rallies and whatnot, is it takes one legislative session to undo all of that work. And that all politics is local. And those NIMBYs, they are showing up at your city and town council meetings. They are showing up in numbers, and we have to show up too. The marathon begins at legalization. That's when it begins.
Absolutely. The fight is never over. I know some people look to events like HempFest and said, well, we already have legal weed. Why? Well, HempFest exists for a reason, because the advocacy is never done. And Joy, if you don't already know Damian Fagan, who was announced as the Chief Equity Officer for Office of Cannabis Management for New York State, we're friends with him, and he's been a guest on this show before. So if you don't know Damian, we're happy to introduce you. He's a third-generation farmer. His family is from Jamaica. He runs Gully Bean Productions and has done some tremendous work on the education side, education advocacy in New York State, right there in the Hudson River Valley. So happy to introduce you if that would be interest to you, or if you don't already know him.
You are wonderful. Thank you 10 million times over. What is interesting is that, and that was a recent appointment. Am I wrong? That's a
It was,
very
yeah.
recent. One of the last seats to be filled, I believe, was that very recent appointment. What is hilarious? Oh my God! Thank you, because he's involved in hemp, Damien, as well.
Right. That's where he
And
started.
so I found a newsletter because I have my podcast and I wanted to interview him for a podcast. It's actually really, he's done a good job making it hard for you to get in touch with him. And I didn't put the 2 and 2 together, that was who was just named. So mind blown. And yes, I would love that. Thank you.
Yeah, he's also done a tremendous job to organize Black farmers around hemp and opportunities and that sort of thing. So
that was the point of my wanting him on my podcast. 110%. I got lots of hemp farmers, brother. They're not all hemp.
Yeah, well, he's doing tremendous work. So thank you, and I'll follow up with you on the backside to make sure you have that. How about anybody else? Eric, glad to see you join us. Speaking of HempFest, joining us from Portugal, maybe. Glad to have you on.
Hey everyone, sorry about that. Yeah, I've just been lurking in the background. I'm actually back from Portugal, but I brought a nice juicy batch of BA5 variant back with me. So I've been I've been a little under the weather for the last couple of days. Like just a lot of sleep. So yeah, but no, it was a very fruitful trip to Portugal, and that was actually the main thrust of I actually gave the opening keynote, and that was a big thrust of my talk is not trying to come over from the standpoint of, oh look, here's the American, particularly the white middle-aged male American coming over here to tell you how to do things. Like I went over there saying that here are the numerous ways that we screwed up, and like state by state basis, like tracing it all the way back to the the early 20th century with Anslinger and those policies. So I kind of outlined how we had this great cottage industry. The unregulated market was really our key success, and we really screwed it up. We really dropped the ball on it. So I was trying to convey a lot of the the mistakes made in North America, in hopes that as Europe continues to march down the path of bringing down their prohibition laws as well, that hopefully they do a better job in terms of making it equitable and accessible to everyone, not just the rich banker types. So we'll see if it works. That's the message we delivered, but it's we're soldiers in an unholy land for sure. Like the big cannabis is here and it is real. So it's just we all have to do what we can to erect guardrails against that. So
for sure. There's so much story to be told and so many people to be educated. Antonio and Alvaro, what's next? What are your plans moving forward? I know you're each working on things that are not necessarily documentary filmmaking, but as far as telling stories, do you have other things in plan, other plans in mind?
I think for me, well, I stepped away from WebJoint, so in that space, I'm not necessarily so hands-on anymore. I am working on a couple of other documentary pieces, but mostly now working to help small startups in the space have more professional branding. So that's kind of like what my company is doing, is making this industry standard branding and marketing for these smaller cannabis businesses that are social equity or veteran owned or women led. Those kind of businesses is who we associate ourselves with and help bring to an industry standard level of operation. So that's what I'm currently doing. Yeah.
Fantastic. We know a lot of people think they can do it all themselves, and they can be the graphic designer too, right? That's just the nature of a small business owner. So hopefully you can reach a lot of them and help them understand the difference of having a professional at the table makes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on my side, on the WebJoint side of things, we're now a multi-state operator. And we're actually looking to replicate some of the educational resources that we provided to the social equity community in Los Angeles into the states that we actually enter the market into. What we're starting to see as far as patterns go are that, as soon as a state legalizes, one, they figure out what their infrastructure and supply chain will look like. And then two, they try to figure out how social equity comes into play, because it is now like the main topic of conversation when it comes to issuing new licenses within a supply chain of the state. So really keeping our eyes and ears on the ground for other states, really scaling up our social equity initiatives within our own company. Just like we did with the Social Equity Owners and Workers Association, really having like a curriculum of how do you apply for your license, and how do you protect yourself in instances where you encounter like a predatory investor that's looking to capitalize on your license. So yeah, that's really what's next for us. I also sit on the board of Social Equity LA alongside Luis Rivera, and really just championing more equitable policies, not just in Los Angeles anymore, but also expanding throughout all of California.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for doing that work, both of you.
Thank you.
As you know, and we welcome you in Washington State. So even though, like Joy mentioned, we were one of the earliest to be, I think, first to vote to be legal, and second to Colorado to make it so. But we don't have home grow, and we don't have delivery. So since you got a big foot in delivery, if you want to come up here and help us do some advocacy, we need it, especially as John would tell you, patience. One of the positive things about COVID is it opened the doors a little bit better, and we got curbside delivery. That's as far as you can deliver in Washington State, is to the curb. But we gotta do much better than that. As you know, the benefit that brings to patients is tremendous.
Absolutely.
So we welcome your allyship up here on that count too. What's something you tell people who might watch the documentary and get inspired and say, geez, man, this is just so unjust, and we gotta do more? For anybody who might watch the documentary and get inspired and say, hey, do you have any ideas for how I can participate in this effort in cannabis equity? What can I do? I don't own a business. I don't own a newspaper. I'm not a documentary filmmaker. What do you tell them?
I think as somebody who wasn't very familiar with the cannabis space, but I said, how can I help? Right? Like I'm a filmmaker, I'm a director. So I said, hey, this is what I can do to help press the issue, right? I'm not a lawyer. I can't help you revise contracts. I can't help you raise funds. But what I can do is use my own skill set to kind of, help and fill the hole wherever your organization needs it. So that's my word of advice is whatever you're good at, really, really push. And more than anything, you can't do it alone. Establish allyship, get involved with, leaders of that community, show, you're truly doing this for something bigger than yourself. Right. So that would be kind of like my word of advice is use your own skill set in the way that you can to help push movement.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and then on my end is really first and foremost understanding your intention. Are you looking to get in this industry as a business owner, someone that just wants to work in this industry, or are you more on the policy activism side? Is there something fundamental that you want to change for the betterment of the industry? And once you hone in on that target, starting local, everything starts at the grassroots, and it all starts with a team. You can go fast alone, but you'll go far with a team. And really building those coalitions and being a part of your community. Again, like the genesis of this documentary was because Alvaro and I decided, hey, we need to be at these city council meetings. This is our community. These are the folks that not only we serve, but help us out whenever we need it. So that's really where it starts, because the reward, and I think Kika is a great example of this. The reward is that your community grows when you win. Kika now has became the first Black woman to own a dispensary in the city of Los Angeles. She has a dispensary on Crenshaw, and she's reinvesting into her community after she's built this coalition, built a community to see what equity looks like in the cannabis industry, and is now a successful dispensary owner reinvesting into her community. And that's something I wanted to relay on this talk, is that you can do that too. Like, starting local, you know, it's going to be a grind. It's going to be a hustle. It's going to be tough. But when you understand your intentions and what your goals are and navigate through the framework that exists to help you get to that goal, when you win, your community wins too. So
Absolutely. And just to partner with that, something we're forever telling our students and our audience, our CannaFam, is identify those BIPOC owned businesses in your area and patronize them. Find out more about them, get to know them, buy your weed from them. That helps them stay in business. It helps them be influential and tell their story. And likewise, get to know anybody you buy weed from, because everybody, all businesses are not created equal. And you might find as you get to know them that your values don't align with the licensee that you're buying cannabis from. And that's so essential. We don't want a McDonald'sification of cannabis, right? We know Whole Foods has already, CEO of Whole Foods a couple of years ago already said, hey, we want it on the shelves when it's legal. So it's coming. It's going to be, you know, Corona's invested, or the Corona parent company's invested over $1 billion to get into the beverage industry. So the huge companies are coming, and you know, we have to maintain this valuable craft industry, because if not, we're gonna suffer in genetics and quality, everything else. So definitely support those people whose values you align with. Thank you both. We're really happy to have you both on today, and thank you for creating the documentary, for sharing your passion. Like you mentioned, this is available on YouTube for free. Thank you for making it for free. It's called Up in Smoke, Cannabis Equity. There's a part 1 and part 2. So we encourage you, that's easy to find. If you look it up in YouTube, Up in Smoke, you make sure to put Cannabis Equity after, or you're going to get Cheech and Chong otherwise. But it's a great documentary, and I think part 2 is about 30 minutes and part 2 is about 40 minutes. So it's very consumable, and you can just knock it out, and it's very captivating. So thanks for producing that. Thanks for spending time with us today.
of course, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
And we want to remind everybody, we do this the first Saturday of every month, and the next 2 Saturdays we're going to be reaching internationally out to some people to find out about the efforts in their countries. So, for instance, August 6th, that Saturday, we're going to have Chris Trasker on with Global Cannabinoid Solutions in the UK to talk about his frustration of wanting the UK to kind of be where the US is as far as developmentally and having legal cannabis, and their efforts in education and advocacy to push that. And then the following month, in September 3rd, that Saturday, we're going to have Naoko Miki of Green Zone Japan, who's doing tremendous work in Tokyo, to bring in people like Dr. Ethan Russo and other professionals to speak about cannabis and cannabis science, and really educate people, influential people who can help make a change. Because as Naoko tells us, she said, "Oh, we're at least 20 years behind the U.S." So we want to do everything we can do to learn about their efforts, applaud their efforts, encourage them, and increase our own Canna IQ. And that's the point of all this. We appreciate you all. We know we're smarter as a hive, and we appreciate you being part of our hive and making us smarter. Thanks for spending time with us today on Saturday. This will be available on YouTube within a week. And so look for it there. If you're not already subscribed to our YouTube channel at Academy of Cannabis Science, we have dozens and dozens of hours of free education. And so we hope you'll avail yourself. We're also excited to announce that we're going to have our first class in entheogens. So we're going to do a psychedelic medicine 101 class that's going to be available in the fall, and we'll start enrolling for that next month. So thanks so much for spending time with us today. Thank you guys, and have a great Saturday, everybody.
Thank you, Trey. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.